Hey everybody, Jim and Scott here talking about Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, not Rise of the Planet of the Apes. This is the sequel to it. Now, Scott was fortunate enough to get to do a set visit for it back in the early summer of 2013. And Scott, why don't you tell us a little bit about where they sent you and the general kind of overview of what you witnessed, and then we can get into very nerdy apes kind of specifics.
You can't talk apes without getting nerdy, right?
No, you can't. It's just impossible.
We went to New Orleans, and they're shooting like most of the film outside on outdoor sets, which is really quite something for a film with this much performance capture, because of course, all the apes, as in Rise of the Planet of the Apes, are performance capture. So this is the biggest project I think ever to do this outside, like not in a controlled environment on a soundstage. So we were actually in downtown New Orleans for the day, where they redressed a couple of blocks of the city to look like post-apocalyptic San Francisco. So it's about 10 or 15 years after the previous film, which of course ended with this virus, the apes kind of escaping, led by Caesar, to the forest across the Golden Gate Bridge, and this virus overtaking humankind, presumably wiping out humanity. And we meet a pocket of survivors, and this group is led by Jason Clarke from Zero Dark 30. And basically, they're just trying to get through. It's a kind of a Mad Max situation. They're trying to get through the day, just trying to find food and supplies. And meanwhile, the apes are doing well for themselves, led by Andy Serkis's Caesar. They've been living off in the forest all this time. They've built a sort of, I don't really want to say ape city, but sort of a civilization of their own in the woods.
Are these humans aware that apes are now that much more sentient than before? I mean, how cognizant would they be of this sort of new stage in evolution?
We don't actually know. We didn't get into that. What I can tell you is that the apes themselves it's not just Caesar now who's talking. They were a little non-specific with us about it, but it seems as though the other apes are starting to communicate verbally to some degree, the way Caesar does. They're also still using some sign language. They've kind of developed their own sign language at this point, and they're also still communicating the way apes would communicate with one another, regular apes as well.
So then basically we're not quite at the ape civilization then that we were accustomed to seeing in the past films, at least up until I guess the fifth movie. They seem like they're more in that kind of category as they were in the fifth movie. But it just seems that there's, from the photos that we've seen and stuff, at least they're on horseback. They seem to have a sort of rudimentary civilization going.
Yes, they do. So yeah, you're right. The filmmakers seem to be taking their time to get us to that point where Charlton Heston is running around in a loincloth. Caesar's still the leader. He would seem to be the most advanced one.
Zayas hasn't gone to medical school yet.
No, he's just a student.
He's just a student.
Yeah, he's got student loans, and but they're more than just regular. I mean, like they have Caesar now has a mate. I guess maybe she's a wife. Her name is Cornelia, which is of course a reference to Cornelius who was Caesar's father in the classic series. In several of the ape roles, which are recurring from the last film, they've actually recast them where they were played by stuntmen or motion capture performers in Rise of the Planet of the Apes. They've now cast actors to play those same roles. So Rocket, why Cookie
Why
Rocket?
Cookie Rocket?
Rocket is back, and the orangutan Maurice is back, and then there's new apes as well. Caesar also has a son now named River, who's a teenager.
Not Gary.
Not Gary, no, not Dave. And there's a parallel there as well, but Jason Clarke also has a young son played by Cody Smit-McPhee, and who was, you might remember from Let Me In.
So is there any semblance of human government left? Any structure whatsoever? Or is it basically, I'm getting the vibe that this is basically Walking Dead with apes.
maybe not as bleak as Walking Dead, but because the virus that wiped everyone out is now apparently dormant. Like either you died from the virus or you didn't. So now the survivors are trying to rebuild. Whereas Walking Dead is sort of no end to the bigger problem of the zombies. But yeah, but it's definitely very end of the world. I don't think there's the closest thing to a government seems to be Jason Clarke is kind of a makeshift leader of this small group of survivors. Gary Oldman is sort of the sheriff of that group, and actually they did refer to him on set at one point as being sort of the governor of the film.
Oh, jeez, I know it. We're going there.
Yeah, so you might be onto something there, Jim.
Is there any sort of like are they going to end up fighting with the apes over the last banana or anything?
There is going to be a battle of some kind, because I know they're bringing a tank into the city, and I also
please let the ape be driving the tank.
That's what we were saying.
So
let Rocket be. I want Rocket driving that thing.
Do we get the sense that the humans are there? I mean, you already kind of get from what you described. It sounds like we have those who are kind of looking for peaceful coexistence with the apes, and then some that are looking to, I guess, wipe them out or just take their land. Or
there's contingents in both camps that don't like one another, and I think that's where the real struggle is going to be. I think Caesar is going to probably have issues within his own camp. Caesar apparently feels pity for the humans and realizes how bad things are and wants to help them, but I think there's going to be apes within his camp that don't feel that way, maybe.
What about the fates of Frida Pinto and James Franco? Are those addressed at all? Or?
Supposedly neither of them are in the movie, and they're just presumed to have died from the virus, which is a pretty lame way to go after you star in a potential franchise film, right?
Right.
Caesar is going to visit. He is going to have a scene where he visits his house where he grew up, where he lived with James Franco and John Lithgow in the first film. So nice. That'll, I guess, maybe present some closure for Caesar. But Franco and Frida, they're not in it at all, I don't think, which is interesting.
Did they also give any sense of future plans for the franchise at this point? I mean, obviously we have to see how this one does, but it is, it's a recognizable brand.
You get, depending on who you ask, you get different answers about that. Dylan Clark, who's the producer, he was kind of like, yeah, when I first pitched Rise of the Planet of the Apes to Tom Rothman, who was the head of Fox at the time, Clark said, the producer said, he wanted to make 8 movies if he could. Like he sees it as a long-term thing. And Andy Serkis, I think, maybe gave us the most real answer, in that he wouldn't just come out and say what the plan was, but if this film is successful, it sounds as though maybe the third film would deal with a bigger battle, probably between humankind and the apes. And Serkis also talked a little bit about the idea of being able to digitally resurrect characters or play different characters because of performance capture CGI. And I asked him, I pointed out that in the original films, Roddy McDowall played Cornelius, and then he played Cornelius' son Caesar. And I said, you could conceivably jump the series ahead 100 years and play Caesar's great-grandson, but it would still be Andy Serkis playing the character. And he didn't rule that out. I mean, who knows if that would ever happen, but he definitely said that that's something that has occurred to them, and they seem to be in it for the long haul as long as people go see this movie. And
it does seem, though, like they're making a concerted effort to make sure that the story stays within a frame of time that modern audiences can relate to. Do you think is that kind of short-sighted? I mean, the original movies started way in the future, and frankly, the series didn't kind of sputter out until they brought it to what was supposed to be contemporary time.
Yeah, I think they, after the Tim Burton remake 10 years ago, whenever that was, that one had kind of gone straight to the first film and redid the first film, and that didn't work out. So when they decided to reboot it again, I think they needed to go. They felt they needed to go in a different direction, which is how they wound up in the modern era. And I think you're right. I think they're think they're very conscious of trying to keep it anchored to something that audiences can sort of relate to still. But at the same time, they do seem to be easing more towards that bigger idea of what the Charlton Heston film was, which is the apes talking and the world having gone to hell. I think they're kind of heading there, but I think they're definitely. I think you're right. I think they're taking their time for sure. Because if the next film has to do with a war between the humans and the apes, you could still see that being kind of. I mean, that could be in the same time period as this movie, even.
Yeah.
So,
what do you think of? I guess I'm struggling for the word here, but the sort of the world that they're establishing. At what point do they see the apes really becoming more and more sort of like the apes that we remember from the old movies, with the sort of with costumes and
right.
and a more structured society? I mean, are we getting any closer to seeing the Lawgiver, or even a version of Ricardo Montalban's character?
I think the idea of the apes wearing costumes and just walking around and like doing that Cornelius Zero sort of comic relief chit chat. I get the sense that's not something that these filmmakers are interested in right now. I think they're very aware, and rightfully so, maybe, of audiences laughing at their apes. There's so much effort put into creating these things, and it's a much more serious story right now from the apes' point of view, because they were sort of oppressed slaves, for lack of a better term, who are just coming into their freedom. So I think they're very, very concerned about them being taken seriously.
Right.
So I don't see that as being something that's going to happen anytime soon. But if you do a franchise long enough, eventually you're going to hit that point. I mean, we know in Rise of the Planet of the Apes, Charlton Heston's spaceship, the Icarus, was seen blasting off into space, right?
Did you get a chance to talk to the director, Matt Reeves, and if so, what did he kind of say was his big draw? Because obviously Rupert Wyatt didn't come back to direct this installment, and he really was, in my opinion, one of the things that made that first movie work. He really established a tone and got great performances out of everyone.
Yeah, and that, I think people were surprised and concerned when Rupert Wyatt dropped out, because he was involved in developing it earlier on. And actually, I think James Franco was even going to come back for part of the film when Wyatt was still on board. But Matt Reeves he made Cloverfield. He made Let Me In. I mean, I think that as a fanboy or a fan of geek properties, you got to be pretty happy with the choice of Reeves. And I think this is a pretty big film for him. I think this is a big film for anyone with all this performance capture. But if anyone can pull it off, I think it's him, and he's heavily involved in this. I don't know what that final screenplay credit will be, but I think he's been heavily involved in rewriting the script as well. So I, for one, think he's a great choice for the job.
How overall, what were your sort of final thoughts on what you saw? Does it make you excited to see the movie? Are you cautiously optimistic? Was there anything you saw that made you concerned that maybe we could be having some sequelitis here? Or
no, I'm pretty excited for it. Of course, it's hard to, with a film like this, so much of it is going to be post-production, because all the apes that we saw are just guys in performance capture suits right now. But seeing that the work that Weta did on the first film, you got to trust. I mean, it's Weta, right? So you got to trust that they're going to get it right. I'm excited for it, and as a big fan, I grew up on the Planet Apes movies, as did you. I've been very concerned when they rebooted it both times that they were going to screw it all up. Well,
they did once,
and they did, right? So which made Rise of the Planet of the Apes even more troubling in a way before we saw it. Then we saw it and we're like, oh, okay, actually this is cool. So I like what they're doing with it, and I think having Andy Serkis there is really important to it. I think he's great, not just because he's the performance capture legend who's been doing this since Gollum, but because I think he's also a real actor, and I think he really gets Caesar. I think he takes it really seriously, and and he's a big part of the franchise now as well. I mean, he's not just a guy playing the ape. I think that he has a lot of input into where this series is going as well. I'm excited for it for sure.
All right. Well, thanks, Scott, for bringing us
Thank you.
your inside knowledge of all things Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. We'll be covering this movie right up until and after, of course, its release. So thanks for watching. We'll catch y'all next time.